Hi, I'm Riley. I became an air traffic controller at 23, guiding million-dollar aircraft through some of the busiest airspace in the country. And for that choice, my family called my career pretend work, like I was playing video games instead of preventing mid-air collisions. But the real heartbreak wasn't their dismissal of my profession. It was realizing they'd been dismissing me my entire life, reducing every achievement to luck, every success to coincidence, the eye rolls when I mentioned my training, the silence when I got my tower certification, the way they'd change the subject whenever I tried to explain what I actually did for a living. It all brought me here, sitting in the control tower at Meridian Regional Airport, watching the most important aircraft in American aviation request permission to land on my runway. And now they're the ones calling, desperate to know if I can pull some strings with my airport connections. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The headset crackled to life at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was halfway through my shift, managing the usual afternoon rush, cargo planes from Memphis, commuter flights from Dallas, a handful of private jets carrying executives who thought their time was more valuable than physics. The coffee in my thermos had gone cold hours ago, but that's normal when you're responsible for every piece of metal moving through 30,000 cubic miles of airspace. Meridian Tower, this is Air Force 2, requesting immediate landing clearance. I froze. My hand hovered over the radio button as the words registered. Air Force 2, the Vice President's aircraft. Not Air Force 1, but the second most important plane in the entire United States government. And they were talking to me. Air Force 2, Meridian Tower, please state your nature of emergency. Air Force 2, we have a mechanical issue requiring immediate diversion. Request vectors to your longest runway. My training kicked in before my nerves could catch up. This was exactly what I'd spent 2 years learning at the Federal Aviation Academy in Oklahoma City. This was why I'd memorized every emergency protocol, every radio procedure, every contingency plan that my family had rolled their eyes at when I tried to explain them over dinner. Air Force 2 cleared for immediate landing runway 27 left. Emergency vehicles are being dispatched. Winds currently 270 at 15 knots. 23 minutes later, I watched through the tower's floor-to-ceiling windows as the most secure aircraft in America touched down on my runway. Perfect approach, textbook landing, exactly where I'd guided them. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the taxiway, emergency lights painting the afternoon sky red and blue, but they weren't needed. The pilots, some of the most experienced aviators in the military, had trusted my instructions completely. As Air Force 2 rolled to a stop, my supervisor, Captain Hayes, clapped me on the shoulder. Textbook work, Riley. Absolutely textbook. But all I could think about was last Sunday's family dinner 3 days earlier when my older brother Garrett had introduced his new girlfriend to everyone. She'd asked what I did for work, and before I could answer, my mother had jumped in with that familiar laugh. Oh, Riley plays air traffic controller. She sits in a little room and tells pilots where to go, like she's playing video games instead of preventing mid-air collisions. The girlfriend had looked confused. Plays? Well, I mean, it's not like she's actually making important decisions, my father had added, cutting his steak with surgical precision. The computers do most of the work these days. She's basically just monitoring things. My sister Autumn had nodded along. It's like being a security guard, but for planes, just watching screens all day. I tried to explain that I was certified to handle Class B airspace, that I managed hundreds of aircraft daily, that a single mistake could kill hundreds of people. But they had already moved on to discussing Garrett's promotion at his law firm, a real career, as Dad put it. That was the thing about my family. They had this way of making me feel invisible while simultaneously making sure they knew exactly how little they thought of me. Not through screaming or fighting, but through dismissal. Through that special kind of polite condescension that left you questioning whether you were being overly sensitive or if they really were as cruel as they seemed. Growing up in Millbrook, I'd always been the odd one out. While Garrett played football and Autumn was crowned homecoming queen, I spent my weekends at the small regional airport, watching planes take off and land, fascinated by the invisible choreography happening in the sky above us. My parents thought it was a phase, something I'd grow out of, like my childhood obsession with dinosaurs or that summer I wanted to be a marine biologist. When I announced I was applying to air traffic control school instead of college, you would have thought I'd said I wanted to join the circus. The disappointment was palpable, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. "But you're so smart, honey," Mom said, the words somehow feeling more insulting than encouraging. "You could be anything. A doctor, a lawyer, a teacher. Why would you want to do that?" Like my dream job was something distasteful they couldn't bring themselves to name properly.
Even when I graduated at the top of my class from the academy, even when I got assigned to Meridian Regional, one of the busiest airports in the region, even when I started earning more than Garrett made in his first year as a junior associate, they still talked about my career like it was an extended hobby, something I did to pass time until I came to my senses and chose a real profession. The truth was, I loved my job. I loved the precision, the split-second decision-making, the knowledge that my voice was the last thing pilots heard before landing safely with their cargo of human lives. I loved being the invisible guardian angel guiding metal birds through storms and sunshine, keeping families together and business moving across the country. But love wasn't enough when the people who were supposed to support you most treated your passion like an embarrassing phase you'd eventually outgrow. Now, watching Air Force Two's emergency vehicles finally stand down, watching the Vice President's security detail exit the aircraft and scan the perimeter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years around my family. Pride that couldn't be diminished by their opinions. This was real. This mattered. And whether they understood it or not, I had just safely landed one of the most important aircraft in America. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Mom. Saw on the news that some government plane had to emergency land at your little airport. Hope it didn't disrupt your work too much. Your little airport. Like Meridian Regional wasn't a major hub handling over 200 flights daily. Like the government plane wasn't carrying the second most powerful person in the country. Like my work was something that could be disrupted rather than the very thing that had just prevented a potential national crisis. I stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped my phone back into my pocket without responding. Outside the tower, Air Force Two sat on my runway, its engines cooling in the afternoon sun, a testament to everything my family had never understood about who I really was. But they were about to learn. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 6 months earlier. The acceptance letter sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. The envelope was thick, official, with the Federal Aviation Administration seal embossed in blue across the top left corner. My hands shook slightly as I slid my finger under the flap, knowing that whatever was inside would either validate 2 years of studying and preparation or send me back to the drawing board. Congratulations, Ms. Riley Jameson. You have been selected for placement at Meridian Regional Airport Air Traffic Control Tower. I read the sentence 4 times before it sank in. Meridian Regional. Not some tiny rural strip where I'd spend my career guiding crop dusters and weekend warriors. Meridian Regional. The kind of facility where careers were made, where the real work happened, where every day brought the kind of challenges that separated competent controllers from exceptional ones. I called my parents immediately, the excitement bubbling out of me before I could even say hello properly. Mom, I got it. I got Meridian Regional. They only take 12 new controllers a year, and that's nice, honey. But I could hear the distraction in her voice, the familiar sound of her scrolling through her phone while pretending to listen. When do you start? Monday! Can you believe it? Monday, I'll be working in one of the busiest control towers in the state. Mom, do you understand what this means? The pilots I'll be working with, the aircraft types, the complexity of the airspace? Well, I hope you'll still have time for family dinners. Garrett's bringing Emma by on Sunday. You know how important it is to me that we all stay close. That was it. No congratulations on achieving something thousands of people applied for and only 12 received. No recognition that her daughter had just landed what most air traffic controllers considered a dream assignment. But I was too excited to let her lukewarm response dampen my spirits. This was my moment. After years of being treated like the family underachiever, I was about to prove that my little hobby was actually a career that demanded skill, intelligence, and split-second decision-making under pressure. The drive to Meridian Regional on that first Monday morning felt like driving toward my real life. I'd visited the airport during my interview process, but pulling into the employee parking lot as an actual air traffic controller felt surreal. The tower rose 13 stories above the main terminal, a concrete and glass pillar that commanded a view of the entire airfield. From the top floor, I would be able to see everything. Every runway, every taxiway, every aircraft movement across the entire complex. Captain Hayes met me in the lobby at exactly 5:45 a.m. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with the kind of calm intensity you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years keeping aircraft separated in increasingly crowded skies. "First day nerves?" he asked, studying my face as we rode the elevator to the tower. "More like first day anticipation," I replied, trying to project confidence I wasn't entirely sure I felt. "Good. Nerves make you second-guess yourself. Anticipation keeps you sharp."
The tower cab was even more impressive than I remembered from my interview. Windows wrapped around the entire space, providing a 360-degree view of the airport and surrounding airspace. Radar screens lined one wall, each one displaying a different slice of the sky, green dots and data blocks representing hundreds of aircraft at various altitudes and positions. "This is your sector," Captain Hayes said, gesturing to a position near the center of the room. "You'll be handling ground movements and tower frequencies for the north side of the field. During busy periods, you might see 40 to 50 aircraft per hour." I nodded, settling into the ergonomic chair that would become my command center. The headset felt substantial around my neck, the microphone positioned exactly where it needed to be for clear communication. Multiple radio frequencies, radar displays, flight strips, everything I'd trained on, but now it was real, and the decisions I made would affect real people. My first day started slowly. Captain Hayes kept me on simple ground movements, directing aircraft to and from gates, coordinating with maintenance vehicles, getting a feel for the rhythm of the airport. But as the morning progressed and air traffic increased, he gradually handed me more responsibility. "Delta 847, contact ground point Niner on 121.9. Ground point Niner, Delta 847. Each radio call was a small victory, proof that I belonged here, that the hundreds of hours I'd spent memorizing procedures and practicing scenarios had prepared me for this moment. The aircraft moved exactly where I directed them. The pilots followed my instructions without question. The complex dance of aviation was happening because of my voice, my decisions, my expertise. During my lunch break, I called Autumn, unable to contain my excitement. "You should see this place, Autumn. I'm literally controlling aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This morning, I guided a 777 with 300 passengers. And that's great, Riley," she said, but her tone suggested she was multitasking. "Hey, I've got to run. I'm showing a house in 20 minutes. But don't you want to hear about—" "Sure, tell me at Sunday dinner. Love you. Bye." The dial tone echoed in my ear. I sat there for a moment, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to understand why my family's indifference hurt more now than it had before. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, I was genuinely proud of something I'd accomplished. Maybe because I wanted to share that pride with the people who were supposed to matter most. That afternoon brought my first real test. Weather was moving in from the west, a line of thunderstorms that would force us to close 2 runways and redirect all traffic to a single approach path. Aircraft began stacking up in holding patterns, pilots requesting updates, airport operations coordinating with security and customs. Meridian Tower, this is United 492 requesting vectors around the weather. United 492, turn left heading 180, descend and maintain 4000. Traffic at your 2 o'clock, 5 miles, a Boeing 737. Left 180 down to 4000, traffic in sight, United 492. For 3 hours, I managed a controlled chaos that would have overwhelmed me just weeks earlier. Aircraft approached from multiple directions, each one requiring individualized attention, precise timing, constant monitoring. My voice remained steady even as my heart rate elevated. My hands moved across controls with growing confidence. The training was working. When the weather finally passed and normal operations resumed, Captain Hayes appeared at my shoulder. "Impressive work on that weather event," he said quietly. "Most new controllers would have needed help managing that volume with those constraints." I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee I'd been nursing for hours. This was recognition from someone who understood exactly what I just accomplished, someone who knew the difference between competent and exceptional. That evening, I drove home with a sense of fulfillment I'd never experienced before. I had found my calling, my place in the world, the thing I was meant to do. The fact that my family didn't understand it seemed less important now. They didn't need to understand for it to be real. But as I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone buzzed with a group text from Mom. "Family dinner Sunday at 6. Garrett has exciting news to share. Can't wait to celebrate our successful son. Heart." Our successful son. Not children, son. Singular. I stared at the message for a long moment, then turned off my phone and headed inside. Tomorrow, I would be back in the tower, guiding aircraft through complex airspace, making decisions that kept hundreds of people safe every day. Tonight, I was going to order takeout and bask in the satisfaction of a job well done, regardless of whether anyone in my family cared enough to ask about it. Some victories, I was learning, had to be celebrated alone, at least until the right people came along to share them with. 3 weeks after starting at Meridian, Sunday dinner at the Jameson House in Millbrook had always followed the same script. Mom would spend hours preparing what she called her famous pot roast, though nobody outside the family had ever tasted it. And we'd gather around the mahogany dining table that Dad had inherited from his father. The good china would come out, the cloth napkins, the crystal water glasses that caught the light from the chandelier overhead. Everything carefully orchestrated to create the illusion of a perfect family meal. I should have known something was different when I walked into the house that evening and saw balloons tied to the staircase railing. Gold and black balloons, the kind you'd see at a graduation party or a promotion celebration. Mom rushed to greet me at the door, her smile so wide it looked like it might crack her face. "Riley, perfect timing! We have such wonderful news to share tonight." Garrett was already seated at the table, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. He'd loosened his tie just enough to look casual but still professional, and his girlfriend Emma sat beside him, clutching his arm like he'd just returned from war. Autumn bounced in her chair with barely contained excitement, and Dad stood at the head of the table holding a bottle of champagne I'd never seen before. "Well," Mom announced, once we'd all taken our seats, "our brilliant son has some news to share." Garrett cleared his throat theatrically, clearly relishing the moment. "I made partner," he said, pausing for maximum dramatic effect. "The youngest associate in Blackstone and Associates history to make full partner. They're putting my name on the letterhead." The explosion of congratulations was immediate and overwhelming. Mom actually clapped her hands together like she was at a Broadway show. Dad popped the champagne cork with ceremony, declaring that this called for the good stuff, a bottle he'd been saving for a truly special occasion. Autumn bounced in her chair with barely contained excitement, and Dad stood at the head of the table holding a bottle of champagne I'd never seen before.
Well, Mom announced, once we'd all taken our seats, our brilliant son has some news to share. Garrett cleared his throat theatrically, clearly relishing the moment. I made partner, he said, pausing for maximum dramatic effect. The youngest associate in Blackstone and Associates history to make full partner. They're putting my name on the letterhead. The explosion of congratulations was immediate and overwhelming. Mom actually clapped her hands together like she was at a Broadway show. Dad popped the champagne cork with ceremony, declaring that this called for the good stuff, a bottle he'd been saving for a truly special occasion. Autumn bounced in her chair with barely contained excitement, and Emma demanded to know all the details about his new office, his new salary, his new responsibilities. "This is what happens when you work hard and make smart choices," Dad said, raising his champagne flute in Garrett's direction. 29 years old and already a partner in one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder. I sat there, listening to the celebration, watching my family beam at Garrett like he'd just discovered the cure for cancer, and tried to summon the appropriate level of enthusiasm. Don't get me wrong, I was proud of my brother. Making partner at his age was genuinely impressive, and he'd worked incredibly hard to get there. But there was something about the way they were praising him that felt like a subtle dig at everyone else at the table. "You know what I love most about this?" Mom said, refilling everyone's champagne glasses. "It's a real career, something substantial, something that matters in the world." A real career, something substantial, something that matters. The words hit me like a physical blow, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. Just 3 weeks earlier, I'd successfully managed my first major weather emergency at Meridian Regional, coordinating 17 aircraft through a severe thunderstorm that had closed half our runways. Captain Hayes had told me it was some of the finest emergency air traffic management he'd seen in his 30-year career. But apparently, keeping hundreds of people safe during a potentially deadly weather event wasn't substantial enough to warrant champagne. The best part, Garrett continued, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight, is that I'll finally be doing work that actually impacts people's lives. Corporate law might not be glamorous, but when I negotiate a merger that saves 500 jobs, when I structure a deal that helps a company expand internationally, that's real impact. That's making a difference. Real impact. Making a difference. I thought about the 747 I'd guided to safety just 2 days earlier when their navigation system failed on final approach. I thought about the medical helicopter I expedited through restricted airspace last week, carrying a child who needed emergency surgery at Millbrook General. I thought about the hundreds of routine flights I managed every day, each one carrying people to reunions, business meetings, vacations, funerals, all the important moments of their lives depending on my voice guiding them safely to their destinations. But none of that was real impact, apparently. Emma, who had been quiet through most of the celebration, finally spoke up. "What about Riley? How's your new job going?" The question seemed to catch everyone off guard, like they'd forgotten I was sitting there. Mom's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. "Oh, Riley's doing her air traffic thing. She sits in a room and talks to pilots on the radio. It's very technical." Technical. Like that was somehow a limitation rather than a skill. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "last week I managed a navigation system failure on a jumbo jet with 400 passengers. The pilots couldn't see the runway through the fog, so I had to guide them using only radar and voice commands for a manual approach." The table went quiet for a moment. Then Dad nodded politely, the way you might acknowledge someone mentioning they'd had a nice day at the park. "That's nice, honey, but isn't that what the computers are supposed to do? I mean, planes basically fly themselves these days, don't they?" I felt something crack inside my chest. "Dad, that's not... Aviation isn't automated the way you think it is. When systems fail, when weather gets dangerous, when emergencies happen, that's when human expertise becomes critical. Every decision I make could mean the difference between..."
I'm sure it's very important to you, Mom interrupted gently, but her tone was the same one she'd used when I was 8 and explaining why my imaginary friend needed a place setting at dinner. We're just saying that Garrett's career has more, how do I put it, visibility, impact on the broader world.
Visibility. That's what it came down to. Garrett's job impressed people at cocktail parties. Mine happened in a tower that most people never saw, managing crises that the general public never knew about. Success in my profession was measured by the absence of disasters, by the flights that landed safely without anyone on the ground ever knowing how close they'd come to catastrophe. Plus, Autumn added, clearly trying to be helpful, Garrett's job is something we can all understand. When he tells us about a case he's working on or a deal he's negotiating, we can follow along. Your job is so technical and specialized that it might as well be in another language. Another language. Like the language of keeping people alive was somehow less worthy of respect than the language of corporate mergers. Remember when you first told us you wanted to be an air traffic controller? Mom asked, her voice taking on that nostalgic tone she used when recounting my childhood mistakes. We thought it was because you'd watched too many movies about airports, like Top Gun or something. Everyone laughed, even Emma, who barely knew me, joined in the gentle mockery of my career choice being inspired by Hollywood rather than genuine passion and aptitude. We figured you'd outgrow it, Dad added, like when you wanted to be a marine biologist after that National Geographic documentary, or a veterinarian after we got Buster. They were comparing my career, my actual, current, professional career, to childhood phases I'd outgrown by age 12. The important thing, Garrett said, reaching across the table to pat my hand in what I suppose was meant to be a supportive gesture, is that you found something that makes you happy. Not everyone needs to have a career with major responsibilities. Some people are perfectly content with simpler work. Simpler work? I managed airspace covering 50,000 square miles. I coordinated with military installations, international flights, medical emergencies, and VIP movements. On busy days, I made split-second decisions affecting thousands of people with zero margin for error and no opportunity for a do-over if I got something wrong. But it was simpler work. The conversation moved on to Garrett's new corner office, his increased salary, his prospects for making senior partner within 5 years. They discussed the implications for his future, the doors that would open, the respect he'd command in the legal community. Mom started planning a celebration party, talking about whom to invite, what kind of catering to order, how to word the announcement for the local newspaper. I sat there picking at my pot roast, wondering when exactly my family had decided that my accomplishments weren't worth celebrating, my challenges weren't worth understanding, my career wasn't worth respecting. Had it been gradual, this dismissal of everything I cared about, or had they simply never taken me seriously in the first place? As dessert was being served, Mom's famous apple pie that she brought out for special occasions, the conversation somehow circled back to career advice. The key, Dad said, settling into his favorite lecture mode, is choosing a profession that commands respect, something where your expertise is valued, where people understand the importance of what you do, like law or medicine or business leadership, fields where you can make a real difference in people's lives. I looked around the table at my family, all nodding in agreement with this wisdom, and realized with crystal clarity that they had never, not once, considered that my work might command respect or make a difference. To them, I was playing an elaborate game of make-believe, talking into our microphone and pretending to be important while the real work of the world happened elsewhere. But somewhere over Millbrook at that exact moment, commercial aircraft were crossing paths at 35,000 feet, separated by miles of empty air and my colleagues' precise calculations. Medical helicopters were racing to hospitals with patients whose lives hung in the balance of perfect coordination between ground control and emergency crews. International cargo flights were carrying supplies, medicines, and goods that kept the global economy moving. And tomorrow morning, I would return to my tower, put on my headset, and take responsibility for every single soul that moved through my piece of the sky, whether my family understood it or not.
The Monday after Garrett's celebration dinner, the first sign that something had shifted came in the form of silence. Not the comfortable quiet of focused concentration that usually filled our house during family dinners, but the pointed, deliberate silence that follows a line being crossed. I didn't realize I'd crossed it until I tried to share something that happened at work and was met with the kind of polite indifference usually reserved for distant relatives discussing their medical procedures. It started small, the way these things always do. Monday evening, I called Mom to tell her about a particularly challenging shift I'd worked that day. A dense fog had rolled in during peak evening hours, reducing visibility to near zero across the entire airport. For 3 hours, I'd been the eyes for pilots who couldn't see beyond their cockpit windows, guiding aircraft weighing hundreds of tons to safe landings using nothing but radar, radio communication, and years of training. "That sounds stressful, honey," Mom said, but I could hear her scrolling through her phone during the pause. "Did I tell you Garrett got interviewed by the Business Journal about his promotion? They're featuring him in next month's Rising Stars Under 30 section." The conversation lasted exactly 47 seconds. I know because I stared at my phone screen after she hung up, watching the call timer freeze at 0047 and wondering when my mother had developed the ability to pivot away from my life so efficiently.
Tuesday brought a group text to the family chat that I hadn't realized I was no longer an active participant in, despite technically still being included. The message was from Autumn. "Garrett's celebration dinner was so amazing. Mom, the decorations were perfect. Dad, that champagne was incredible. Can't wait for the next family milestone worth celebrating." The subtext was clear enough that it might as well have been written in neon letters. The next family milestone worth celebrating. Not my recent commendation from Captain Hayes for exceptional performance during severe weather operations. Not my selection to train the next group of new controllers. Not the letter of appreciation I'd received from a pilot's emergency landing I'd coordinated when his engine failed over populated areas. None of those milestones were worth celebrating, apparently. Wednesday evening, I made the mistake of thinking that maybe Sunday's dinner conversation had been a fluke, a moment of poor timing when everyone was focused on Garrett's news. I called Dad to tell him about a VIP movement I'd coordinated that morning, a senator's aircraft that had required special security protocols and precise timing coordination with multiple agencies. "That's nice, Riley," he said in the same tone he might use to acknowledge that the weather was pleasant. "Listen, I'm glad you called. We need to talk about something important." My heart lifted slightly. Maybe he wanted to hear more details about the VIP coordination or ask about the security protocols involved. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we're concerned about Sunday's dinner conversation. The way you kept trying to, compete with Garrett's announcement." Compete. That's what he called my attempts to share my professional life with the people who were supposed to care about me most. "Dad, I wasn't competing with anyone. I was just trying to—" "Riley, honey, we understand that you're proud of your job, and that's wonderful. But there's a time and place for everything, and Sunday was Garrett's moment. We've raised you better than to steal attention from your brother's achievements. Steal attention by mentioning that I'd prevented a potential aviation disaster? The thing is, Dad," continued, his voice taking on that patient, educational tone he'd used when I was 12 and needed correction, "not every job requires the same level of, how should I put this, public recognition. Some careers are naturally more suited to quiet satisfaction rather than family celebration." Quiet satisfaction, code for your work isn't important enough for the rest of us to pretend to care about it. "What we're asking," he continued, "is that you try to be more mindful of when it's appropriate to discuss your work. Family gatherings are for celebrating real milestones, not everyday job duties." Everyday job duties. Landing aircraft in zero visibility was not an everyday job duty. It was an emergency procedure that required years of specialized training and split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. But in my father's mind, it was routine enough to be dismissed as not worth discussing at family dinner.
The conversation ended with him suggesting that I might want to consider whether my job was giving me a healthy perspective on what constituted genuine achievement. The implication being that I was so starved for recognition in my insignificant career that I was grasping at ordinary moments and trying to inflate them into accomplishments. Thursday brought the most painful revelation yet. I discovered, completely by accident, that my family had started a separate group chat. I only found out because Autumn accidentally sent a message meant for the other chat to the one that still included me. Should we invite Riley to the celebration dinner for Garrett's business journal interview, or would that be awkward after her attention-seeking episode on Sunday? She deleted the message within minutes and sent a hasty correction. Wrong chat, meant to send that to Emma, but the damage was done. There was another family group chat, one without me, one where they discussed whether including me in family events would be awkward. An attention-seeking episode. That's what they called my attempt to share my professional life with the people who were supposed to care about me most. I sat in my apartment that evening, staring at the deleted message notification on my phone, trying to process the casual cruelty of it. They hadn't cut me off with dramatic confrontation or heated arguments. They'd simply faded me out, like adjusting the volume on a radio until my voice became background noise they could ignore. Friday evening brought what I initially thought might be an olive branch. Mom called and actually asked about my week at work. For a brief moment, I felt hopeful that maybe they'd realized how dismissive they'd been, that family dinner had been a misunderstanding we could move past. It's been really busy, I told her, carefully avoiding specific details that might be construed as attention-seeking. Lots of weather challenges this week. That's nice, dear. Listen, I'm calling because we want you to know that you're still invited to family dinners, of course. We would never want you to feel excluded. The but was coming. I could hear it in her tone. But we think it might be helpful if you tried to focus more on other people's news when we're all together. Ask questions about Garrett's cases or Autumn's real estate deals. Show interest in what everyone else is doing. Family dinner should be about connecting with each other, not about making ourselves feel important. Making ourselves feel important. As if sharing professional achievements with family was an act of vanity, rather than a natural desire to connect with the people that mattered most.
We're not saying your job isn't valuable to you personally, Mom continued, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone she used when delivering criticism disguised as concern. But the reality is that most people don't understand what you do, so talking about it extensively can make others feel left out of the conversation. Most people don't understand what you do, including, apparently, my own family. The important thing is that you're happy and fulfilled in your work, she said, as if happiness and fulfillment were consolation prizes for people whose careers weren't worthy of respect or recognition. Not everyone needs external validation for their job satisfaction. External validation, like wanting your family to acknowledge your accomplishments was somehow needy or inappropriate? The conversation ended with Mom reminding me that Sunday dinner was at 6 and that Garrett would be sharing details about his upcoming interview with the business journal. She hoped I would remember to ask thoughtful questions and show appropriate enthusiasm for his continued success. I hung up the phone and sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment, finally understanding the new rules of engagement. I was welcome at family gatherings as long as I remained an audience member rather than a participant. I could attend their celebrations as long as I didn't expect any celebrations of my own. I could share in their joy as long as I didn't seek reciprocal interest in mine. They hadn't disowned me, they'd simply reduced me to a supporting character in the story of their family, someone whose primary value lay in her ability to reflect their light back to them rather than generate any illumination of her own. Saturday morning, I drove to work with a strange sense of clarity.
As I climbed the 13 flights to the control tower, as I put on my headset and took responsibility for the safety of every aircraft in my sector, as I made decisions that would determine whether hundreds of people made it home to their families that day, I realized something profound. My family's inability to value my work didn't make it less valuable. Their failure to understand my profession didn't make it less important. Their need to diminish my accomplishments didn't make them less real. But it did make their opinion of me significantly less relevant to my sense of self-worth. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to have to learn to celebrate my victories without them. 2 weeks after the family chat revelation. The coffee cart outside the Meridian Regional employee entrance had become my morning ritual, not because the coffee was particularly good, though it was better than the break room's perpetual pot of what could be generously called caffeinated water, but because it gave me 5 minutes of normal human interaction before climbing 13 floors to spend my day talking to pilots I'd never see. That's where I met Nora Castellano. She was standing in line ahead of me on a Tuesday morning wearing the distinctive Navy uniform of Airport Operations Management, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. When she reached the front of the line, she ordered her coffee black, and then, without any prompting from the vendor, added, "And whatever the young woman behind me wants. She guides my husband safely to the ground every time he flies, so caffeine's the least I can do." I looked around confused until I realized she was talking about me. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" She turned with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Not officially, but my husband is Captain Rodriguez with Transcontinental Airlines. He flies the Denver Meridian route twice a week, and he comes home talking about the controller in Tower 7 who has the calmest voice in weather events he's ever heard. Says you guided him through a thunderstorm last month like you were giving directions to the grocery store." Captain Rodriguez? I remembered that flight, a 737 with 180 passengers that had hit severe turbulence and needed immediate deviation around a storm cell that had developed faster than the Weather Service had predicted. 3 hours of constant coordination, rerouting, and precise altitude management to get him and 5 other aircraft safely around the worst weather system we'd seen in months. "Just doing my job," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "Honey, I've been married to a pilot for 28 years. I know the difference between just doing your job and doing your job exceptionally well. Miguel comes home from most flights and forgets to mention the controller. He comes home from your shifts and talks about how professional and competent you are." She handed me a business card as we walked toward the terminal entrance. "I'm the operations coordinator for the whole airport. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me." That conversation might have ended there. Another pleasant but brief interaction in the anonymous ecosystem of airport life. But the next morning, Nora was back in the coffee line, and the morning after that. By the end of the week, we'd developed an unspoken routine. Coffee, brief conversation about weather or traffic patterns, then off to our respective jobs.
Unlike the careful navigation required for conversations with my family, talking to Nora was effortless. She understood aviation terminology without requiring explanation. She grasped the complexity of air traffic management without needing me to justify why it mattered. When I mentioned coordinating simultaneous emergency landings, she didn't ask if that was really that complicated, or suggest that computers could probably handle it just as well. "You know what I love about this job?" she said one morning as we stood outside the terminal entrance, watching the first wave of departure flights taxi toward the runways. "Most people see an airport and think about their own travel plans, whether their flight will be delayed, if they'll make their connection, where their luggage ended up. They don't see the invisible choreography that makes it all work." She gestured toward the control tower. "Up there, you're conducting an orchestra where every instrument is a multi-million-dollar aircraft carrying hundreds of lives. One wrong note, one missed cue, and the consequences are unthinkable. But when it works perfectly, which it does, thousands of times a day, nobody notices, because That's what they expect. It was the first time anyone had described my job as conducting an orchestra rather than talking into a radio. Our morning conversations gradually expanded beyond aviation talk. Nora had 2 daughters, both adults now, both in careers that she spoke about with obvious pride, but without the performative enthusiasm my mother reserved for Garrett's accomplishments. When she mentioned her older daughter's promotion to chief financial officer at a tech startup, it was with quiet satisfaction rather than champagne-worthy celebration. When she talked about her younger daughter's work as a special education teacher, she spoke with the same respect she'd shown for both careers. Different kinds of impact, she'd said, when I commented on how equally proud she seemed of both daughters. Rosa affects the financial trajectory of companies and creates jobs for hundreds of people. Carmen shapes the future of children who need extra support to reach their potential. Both essential, both challenging, both worthy of respect. The concept was revolutionary to me, that parents could value different types of achievement equally, that success didn't need to be measured on a single, narrow scale of social status and visibility. 3 weeks into our morning coffee routine, Nora noticed something I'd been trying to hide. "You've been quieter lately," she said as we watched a cargo plane lumber down the runway, heavy with freight bound for international destinations. "Everything okay at home?" The question caught me off guard. I'd become so accustomed to keeping my family struggles separate from my professional life that having someone notice the emotional spillover was unsettling. "Just family stuff," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing that affects my work." Nora was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. "You know, Miguel had a similar situation early in his career. His family didn't understand why he'd want to be a pilot instead of following his father into the family restaurant business. They saw flying as frivolous, I guess, like playing with expensive toys instead of doing real work." The parallel was so accurate, it was almost painful. How did he handle it? For a while, he tried to make them understand, brought home articles about aviation safety, explained the training requirements, talked about the responsibility of carrying passengers safely across the country. But they just saw a guy who didn't want to work in the family restaurant. Did they ever come around? She smiled sadly. Some of them did, eventually. His mother started bragging to her friends about her son, the pilot, when she realized how impressed they were. His younger brother began asking questions about flight training. But his father? Well, Miguel stopped waiting for his father's approval and started building relationships with people who understood what he'd chosen. She gestured toward the terminal around us. "Look at this place, Riley. Every single person working here, from the baggage handlers to the TSA agents to the gate staff to you up in that tower, we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. We get people home to their families, we move goods that keep the economy running, we connect communities across vast distances. That's not small work, that's essential work." "But my family doesn't see it that way." "Then your family is missing out on knowing who you really are," she said simply. "And that's their loss, not yours." The conversation shifted something fundamental in my perspective. For months, I'd been trying to translate my accomplishments in terms my family could understand, constantly explaining and justifying the value of what I did. But Nora was suggesting that the problem wasn't my ability to communicate, it was their willingness to listen. Our friendship deepened over the following weeks. Nora invited me to dinner at her house, where I met Miguel, a soft-spoken man with careful eyes who talked about aviation with the reverence of someone who understood how much trust was placed in his hands every time he took off. Their home was filled with aviation memorabilia, but not in a flashy way. Photos of aircraft Miguel had flown, certificates of achievement, letters from passengers who had written to thank him for safe flights during difficult weather.
"This is beautiful," I said, looking at a framed letter from a woman whose elderly mother had been flying to visit her for possibly the last time. Miguel had personally ensured her wheelchair was properly accommodated and had made the flight as smooth as possible during her medical fragility. "People trust us with the most important moments of their lives," Miguel said quietly. "Weddings, funerals, reunions. business deals that affect entire companies. Every flight carries someone's critical moment, and our job is to make sure they get there safely to live it. For the first time in months, I felt seen by the people around me. Not just acknowledged or politely tolerated, but genuinely understood. "You know what I think you need," Nora said as we sat on their back patio after dinner, watching aircraft lights move across the dark sky like slow-motion shooting stars. "You need to stop seeking validation from people who don't speak your language and start building community with people who do." "What do you mean?" "There's a reason Miguel comes home talking about your work, Riley. It's because he recognizes excellence when he encounters it. Controllers and pilots, we speak the same language, we understand the same stakes, we respect the same skills. Maybe it's time you spent more energy with people who appreciate what you bring to the world." She was right, but the realization came with its own sadness. I'd spent so much emotional energy trying to earn my family's respect that I'd neglected to notice the respect I was already receiving from my professional community. Captain Hayes regularly assigned me to the most challenging shifts because he trusted my judgment. Pilots requested my frequency during difficult weather because they knew I'd guide them safely. New controllers shadowed my shifts because my techniques were considered exemplary. I had been seeking approval from the wrong audience. "The beautiful thing about finding your calling," Nora said as the evening wound down, "is that it connects you with other people who found theirs. Miguel and I met because we both worked at the airport. Half our closest friends are people we've worked with over the years. When you love what you do and do it well, you naturally attract other people who understand that kind of dedication." Driving home that night, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because my family situation had resolved, it hadn't, but because I'd been reminded that family could be chosen as well as inherited. The community of people who respected my expertise, understood my passion, and valued my contribution to their safety, that was a form of family too. And maybe it was time I invested more of my emotional energy in relationships that gave back what I put into them. 4 months later, the first text came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing weather reports for the afternoon shift. A simple message from Autumn that appeared innocuous enough. "Hey, haven't heard from you in forever. How's work going?" I stared at the message for a moment, coffee growing cold in my hand. 4 months of virtual silence, 4 months of being excluded from the secondary family chat, 4 months of perfunctory responses to any attempt I'd made at conversation, and now, suddenly, casual interest in my professional life. I responded carefully. "Work's been busy. How are things with you?" Her reply came within minutes, which was unusual. Autumn typically took hours to respond to messages, claiming her real estate career kept her too busy for immediate responses. "Oh, the usual chaos." "Speaking of busy, I heard from Mom that you've been working at that big airport. Must be exciting seeing all those different types of planes." Different types of planes? As if I were a child watching aircraft at a museum rather than a certified professional managing their movements through complex airspace. But there was something else in her message that made me pause. I hadn't told my mother about any recent developments at work, mainly because she had made it clear that such conversations made family gatherings uncomfortable. So how had Autumn heard from Mom that work had been busy? The answer came 2 hours later in a phone call from my mother. Her voice had that particular brightness she reserved for situations where she needed something but was trying to disguise it as casual conversation. "Riley, sweetheart, I was just talking to Mrs. Henderson from down the street, and she mentioned seeing you interviewed on the local news last month. Something about aircraft safety? I had no idea you would be becoming such a local celebrity." The interview was brief, a 3-minute segment about new safety protocols implemented at Meridian Regional following a nationwide FAA initiative. Captain Hayes had recommended me as the spokesperson because of my communication skills and technical expertise. It had aired at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, hardly prime time, and I'd mentioned it to no one in my family because previous attempts to share professional achievements had been met with polite disinterest. "It wasn't a big deal, Mom, just explaining some procedural updates."
Oh, but it was wonderful, Mrs. Henderson said. You sounded so professional and knowledgeable. She was very impressed that someone from our family was representing the airport on television. Someone from our family. As if my professional competence reflected on them, rather than being something I'd earned independently. I've been thinking, Mom continued, her tone shifting to that particular cadence she used when maneuvering toward a request. We really should celebrate your achievements more. I feel terrible that we haven't been as supportive as we should be of your career.
The sudden reversal was so complete, it felt like whiplash. Months of dismissal and diminishment, and now she felt terrible about not being supportive? That's okay, Mom. I understand that not everyone finds aviation interesting. No, that's not true at all. We're very interested. In fact, your father and I were just saying how we don't really understand what you do day to day. Maybe you could explain it to us sometime, over dinner this Sunday. An invitation to Sunday dinner. The first one in the months that hadn't come with caveats about focusing on other people's news or avoiding attention-seeking behavior. Friday brought a text from Garrett. Riley, heard you were on TV. Very cool. We should catch up soon. From the brother who'd been too busy with his new partner responsibilities to return any of my calls over the past several months. Saturday evening, Dad called. His voice carried that hearty, forced enthusiasm he typically reserved for conversations with clients he didn't particularly like, but needed to maintain relationships with. Riley, your mother told me about your television appearance. I have to say, I'm very proud of you for representing the family so well in a public forum. Representing the family. Not representing myself, my profession, or my expertise, but the family. I've been doing some reading about air traffic control, he continued, which was perhaps the most surprising statement he'd ever made to me. Fascinating stuff, very technical, very complex. I had no idea the level of responsibility involved. The same responsibility I'd tried to explain to him countless times over family dinners, only to be told that computers handled most of the work these days. I'd love to learn more about what you do. Maybe you could walk me through a typical day sometime. I'm genuinely curious about the technical aspects of aircraft management. The terminology was slightly wrong. We managed air traffic, not aircraft directly, but it was closer to professional respect than anything I'd heard from him before. Sure, Dad, that would be nice. Excellent. I've been thinking that we, as a family, haven't done a good enough job of understanding each other's careers. Maybe we could all share more details about our work. Real details, not just surface-level updates. Real details, as opposed to the surface-level dismissal my work had received for the past several years. Sunday's dinner invitation was extended with unusual warmth. Mom called personally to confirm, mentioning that she had prepared my favorite dessert, lemon bars, and that everyone was looking forward to hearing about my professional experiences. My professional experiences, not my little job or my technical work, but my professional experiences. The sudden shift in language and attitude was so dramatic that I found myself wondering if they'd all suffered simultaneous head injuries. People don't typically reverse years of dismissive behavior overnight without some external motivation. That motivation became clearer when Autumn called Sunday morning, just hours before the planned dinner. Riley, I'm so excited for tonight. I've been telling Emma all about your interview and your expertise with aircraft operations. She's really interested in learning more about the aviation industry. Emma, Garrett's girlfriend who'd been present for the partner celebration dinner where my family had made it clear that my career was nothing worth celebrating. She mentioned that her company, the marketing firm where she works, they've been trying to land some aviation clients. Apparently, it's a really lucrative sector, and they're having trouble finding consultants who can help them understand the technical aspects well enough to create effective campaigns. Consultants who could help them understand the technical aspects, the same technical aspects my family had spent years treating as overly complicated hobbies rather than professional expertise. The pieces clicked into place with uncomfortable clarity. My family's sudden interest in my career, their newfound respect for my professional knowledge, their eagerness to hear real details about my work, none of it was genuine appreciation for my accomplishments.
It was recognition that my expertise might be useful to someone they actually cared about impressing. Emma needed aviation industry insights for her marketing firm. My television interview had demonstrated that I possessed credible knowledge in a lucrative field. Therefore, my career was suddenly worth celebrating and my expertise was worth respecting. Not because they'd realized how unfairly they'd been treating me, not because they'd come to understand the importance of my work, but because someone in their social circle needed something I could provide. "That sounds great, Autumn," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "I'd be happy to share what I know about the industry." "Perfect. Emma will be so pleased. She was saying how impressed she was that Garrett has such a knowledgeable sister. She had no idea you were such an expert in your field." Such an expert in my field. The same field they've been referring to as pretend work and technical hobbies for years. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment looking out at the distant control tower where I'd spend Monday morning managing aircraft movements across thousands of square miles of airspace. The same work that had been too technical for family dinner conversation was suddenly fascinating enough to warrant celebration and consultation.
I thought about Nora's words from weeks earlier. Maybe it's time you spent more energy with people who appreciate what you bring to the world. My family didn't appreciate what I brought to the world. They appreciated what I could bring to Emma's marketing campaign. The realization should have made me angry, but instead I felt a strange kind of clarity. For the first time in months, I understood exactly where I stood with them. Not as someone whose accomplishments deserved recognition, but as someone whose skills might prove useful when properly leveraged. They weren't seeking reconciliation or offering genuine respect. They were networking. And now I had to decide how to respond to family members who had spent years dismissing my expertise, suddenly wanting to benefit from it. The answer came to me as I watched a commercial airliner climb into the evening sky, its navigation lights blinking steadily as it followed the precise flight path that controllers like me had calculated to keep it separated from every other aircraft in the region. I would go to dinner. I would listen to their questions with the same professional courtesy I showed to pilots requesting information, and I would give them exactly the level of respect and consideration they had shown me over the years when I'd tried to share my professional life with them. Which was to say, polite acknowledgement, with no genuine investment in their success. They wanted to use my expertise. They were welcome to try. But they were about to discover that respect, real respect, was something that couldn't be manufactured on demand when it became convenient. Sunday evening, the Jameson House. I arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a bottle of wine and the kind of professional composure I typically reserved for coordinating emergency aircraft landings. The house looked the same as always: manicured lawn, perfectly arranged seasonal decorations, the kind of suburban perfection that suggested nothing complicated ever happened behind its doors. Emma answered when I knocked, which was unusual. Typically, Mom would greet me with theatrical enthusiasm, but tonight, Emma stood in the doorway wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment and a smile so bright it could have guided aircraft to the runway. "Riley, finally! I've been so excited to meet you properly. Garrett has told me so much about your fascinating career." Fascinating career. The same career Garrett had compared to playing video games just months earlier. Come in, come in. Everyone's in the living room, and we've been having the most interesting conversation about aviation safety protocols." Aviation safety protocols. I followed inside, noting how the entire family was arranged in what could only be described as a presentation formation. Mom and Dad on the couch, Garrett in the wingback chair, Autumn perched on the ottoman, all facing the chair clearly designated for me. The coffee table held what looked like printed articles about the airline industry, alongside Mom's good china. "Riley, sweetheart." Mom rose to embrace me with more physical affection than she'd shown in years. "We were just discussing how incredible it must be to work in such a high-stakes environment. Emma has been asking the most thoughtful questions about aviation management." High-stakes environment? Aviation management? The professional terminology was so foreign coming from my mother's mouth that it sounded like she was reading from a script. "Please sit," Dad said, gesturing to the obvious chair of honor. "We've been looking forward to this conversation all week."
I settled into the chair, wine still in my lap, and looked around at 5 faces displaying levels of interest in my career that I'd never seen before. If I hadn't understood what was happening, I might have been moved by their apparent enthusiasm. So, Emma began, leaning forward like a journalist conducting an interview, Garrett mentioned that you're responsible for coordinating movements of commercial aircraft at one of the region's busiest airports. That must require incredible technical expertise. Incredible technical expertise. Not talking to pilots on the radio or monitoring things, but incredible technical expertise. It's definitely complex work, I replied carefully. Managing multiple aircraft simultaneous at different altitudes and velocities requires constant attention to detail. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear about. Emma's eyes lit up with what appeared to be genuine interest, though I suspect it was genuine interest in what my knowledge could do for her rather than who I was as a person. My firm has been trying to break into the aviation sector, but we keep running into the problem of not understanding the industry well enough to create compelling campaigns. There it was, the real reason for this sudden family reunion. The technical aspects are so specialized, and frankly, most of our team doesn't have the background to communicate effectively with aviation clients. We need someone who really understands the operational side of the industry. Garrett jumped in with enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. I told Emma you'd be the perfect person to consult with. You have all that insider knowledge about how airports actually function, what challenges the industry faces, what kind of messaging would resonate with aviation professionals. Insider knowledge, challenges the industry faces, messaging that would resonate with aviation professionals. The business terminology flowed from Garrett with the same awkward formality as Mom's sudden use of technical aviation language. It would be such a valuable partnership, Emma added quickly. My firm works with some really prestigious clients, and having authentic aviation expertise would set us apart from our competitors. Valuable partnership. Authentic aviation expertise. She was speaking to me the way I'd watched Garrett speak to clients, with calculated charm designed to secure a desired outcome.
We'd compensate you fairly, of course, she continued. Industry consultation rates for someone with your level of expertise run quite high. This could be really lucrative for you. Compensate you fairly. Industry consultation rates. Your level of expertise. The same level of expertise my family had been dismissing as pretend work and technical hobbies for years was suddenly worth industry-standard consultation fees. Mom clasped her hands together with delight. Isn't this wonderful? Finally, Riley's specialized knowledge can benefit the whole family. Finally, Riley's specialized knowledge can benefit the whole family. As if my expertise had been waiting dormant until the moment it could prove useful to someone they actually respected. Emma's been explaining how marketing firms like hers can really help aviation companies improve their public communication, Dad added, his voice carrying the same tone he used when explaining why Garrett's legal work was so important to society. It's exactly the kind of partnership that benefits everyone involved. The kind of partnership that benefits everyone involved, except, of course, that the partnership wouldn't actually benefit everyone. It would benefit Emma's career advancement and my family's ability to claim reflected credit for her success. Autumn nodded eagerly. And think about how amazing it would be to have your expertise featured in major marketing campaigns. You could be the face of authentic aviation knowledge. The face of authentic aviation knowledge. The same authentic aviation knowledge they'd spent years treating as an embarrassing overshare at family dinners. I looked around the room at their expectant faces, all watching me with the kind of focused attention I'd craved from them for years. Finally, they were listening when I talked about my work. Finally, they were asking detailed questions about my professional experience. Finally, they were treating my expertise as valuable and worthy of respect. And all it had taken was someone they actually cared about needing to profit from it. This is quite an opportunity, I said slowly, setting the wine bottle on the coffee table with deliberate care. Let me make sure I understand correctly. Emma, you need aviation industry expertise to develop marketing campaigns for potential clients.
And you think my background in air traffic control would provide the kind of authentic knowledge your firm is missing. Exactly. Emma's smile grew even brighter. Your insider perspective would be invaluable. Insider perspective. Invaluable. The same perspective that had been too technical for family conversation was now invaluable when it could advance someone's business goals. And this consultation work would be compensated at industry standard rates? Absolutely. We're talking about a serious professional arrangement, not a family favor. A serious professional arrangement, not a family favor. As if the distinction mattered when the entire premise was based on leveraging family connections to access expertise they could then monetize. I leaned back in my chair, studying each face in turn. Mom practically vibrating with excitement about finally having something to brag about that involved my career. Dad clearly pleased that my technical knowledge might contribute to what he'd consider a legitimate business success. Garrett obviously proud that he'd been able to facilitate this connection between his girlfriend and his suddenly useful sister. Autumn delighted to be part of a family networking success story. And Emma, watching me with the focused attention of someone who'd identified exactly what she needed and was confident she was about to secure it. You know, I said, my voice remaining perfectly level, setting the wine bottle on the coffee table with deliberate care. This is quite an opportunity. For years, I've tried to explain my work to this family. I've shared details about complex emergency procedures, discussed technical challenges of managing multiple aircraft in severe weather, described the split-second decision-making required to prevent disasters. And the consistent response has been that my job is too technical, too specialized, too difficult for you to understand or appreciate. The room grew quiet. Emma's smile flickered slightly, though she maintained her professional composure. But now, suddenly, that same technical expertise is not only understandable, but valuable. The same specialized knowledge that was too complicated for family dinner is worth industry-standard consultation fees. The same career that was dismissed as pretend work is now a serious professional asset worth leveraging for business development. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Riley, I think you're misunderstanding. No, Dad, I don't think I am. I think I'm understanding perfectly, perhaps for the first time. I stood up, wine bottle still unopened in my hands, and looked at each of them with the same professional assessment I used when evaluating pilots' competency during emergency situations. Emma, I appreciate your interest in consulting with me about aviation industry marketing. However, I'm afraid my consultation schedule is completely booked for the foreseeable future. I'd recommend reaching out to one of the many aviation industry consultants who specialize in working with marketing firms. I'm sure they'd be happy to provide the expertise you're looking for. The silence that followed was absolute.
The drive from my parents' house to my apartment took 17 minutes, but I sat in their driveway for another 10 before starting the engine. Through the living room windows, I could see the silhouettes of my family still gathered exactly where I'd left them, frozen in what I imagined was a tableau of shock and disbelief. Emma's carefully orchestrated networking opportunity had just walked out the door, and none of them seemed quite sure how to process what had happened. My phone started buzzing before I'd even reached the first traffic light. Text after text, each notification lighting up the dashboard like an aircraft warning system. I waited until I was safely parked in my apartment complex before reading them. Autumn. Riley, what just happened? Emma is really upset and confused. Garrett. That was pretty harsh, don't you think? Emma was trying to compliment your expertise. Dad. We need to talk about your behavior tonight. Call me. Mom. I don't understand why you got so defensive. We were celebrating your knowledge. I stared at the messages, each one confirming that they had completely missed the point. Even now, even after I'd explicitly laid out the hypocrisy of their sudden interest, they were framing my response as defensive behavior rather than justified boundary setting. But for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced around my family.
complete clarity about who they were and what they valued. Monday morning brought an unexpected consequence of Sunday's dinner. Captain Hayes called me into his office before my shift began, wearing the kind of expression that suggested either very good news or very bad news. Riley, I had an interesting phone call this morning from a woman named Emma Richardson, claiming to be your sister-in-law. My stomach dropped. She's not my sister-in-law. She's my brother's girlfriend. Well, she seemed to think there was some kind of misunderstanding about a consultation opportunity she'd offered you. Apparently, she felt your family gathering ended on a confusing note, and she wanted to reach out directly through professional channels. The audacity was breathtaking. Emma had somehow found the airport's main number, identified my supervisor, and called to discuss what she perceived as a failed business negotiation. She mentioned that she represents a marketing firm interested in aviation industry consulting, and that she'd been led to believe you might be available for such work. Captain Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the same careful attention he used when evaluating a controller's performance during challenging conditions. I told her that any outside consulting work would need to be cleared through proper channels and couldn't interfere with your primary responsibilities here. But I have to ask, is there something going on that I should know about? I took a breath, trying to organize the situation into something that wouldn't sound like unprofessional family drama. She approached me through family connections about consulting work. I declined. I didn't expect her to contact the airport directly. I see. Captain Hayes nodded slowly. Well, she seemed quite surprised by your refusal, mentioned that your family had indicated you'd be eager for such opportunities. Your family had indicated you'd be eager for such opportunities. They'd discussed my presumed willingness to help Emma before even asking me, treating my expertise as a family resource they could promise to others. I'm not interested in outside consulting at this time, I said firmly. Good, because frankly, Riley, you're one of the most competent controllers I've worked with in 30 years. Your focus belongs here, managing aircraft, not managing marketing campaigns. The conversation should have ended there, but Captain Hayes wasn't finished. There's something else you should know. That phone call made me realize something I should have mentioned weeks ago. The FAA regional office has been asking for exceptional controllers who might be interested in advanced training opportunities. There's a program for high-potential controllers to receive specialized training in approach control for major hub airports. My heart rate increased slightly. Approach control was the next level of air traffic management, more complex, more responsibility, higher pay, and significantly more professional recognition. It's a competitive program. Only 12 controllers nationwide are selected each year for the advanced training, but your performance here, especially your handling of emergency situations and complex weather events, makes you an ideal candidate. I'd be very interested in that opportunity. I thought you might be. I've already submitted your recommendation paperwork. The selection process takes about 6 months, but I have high confidence in your chances. For the rest of my shift, I managed aircraft movements with a sense of professional satisfaction that had nothing to do with my family's opinion of my career. Pilots requested my frequencies specifically. Colleagues asked my advice on complex situations. My expertise was recognized, valued, and respected by people who understood exactly what it represented. That evening, Nora found me at the coffee cart, though I was buying decaf since my shift had ended. "You look different," she observed, studying my face with the same attention she probably used when reviewing airport operations reports. "Different how?" "Lighter? Like you'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." I told her about Sunday's dinner, about Emma's consultation request, about my family's sudden reversal of opinion regarding my career value. Nora listened without interruption, nodding occasionally in recognition of patterns she'd probably seen before. "So they wanted to use your expertise to impress someone they actually respect," she summarized when I finished. That's exactly what it was.
And you said no. I said no. Good for you. Her approval was immediate and unqualified. Miguel went through something similar early in his career.
His family suddenly became interested in his pilot connections when his cousin needed help getting a job with an airline. Not because they'd come to respect his work, but because his work had become useful to them. How did he handle it? He helped his cousin with interview preparation and industry insights, but he made it clear that this didn't constitute forgiveness for years of dismissive treatment. His cousin got the job, by the way, and the family went right back to treating Miguel's career as less important than everyone else's. Do you think I made the right choice? Nora was quiet for a moment, watching a cargo plane taxi past the terminal windows. I think you made the choice that preserves your self-respect. And self-respect, once you give it away, is extremely difficult to get back. My phone buzzed with another family text, this one from Garrett. Emma is really hurt by how you handled things. She was trying to pay you a genuine compliment about your expertise. Maybe you could reconsider. I showed the message to Nora, who read it and shook her head. She was trying to pay you a genuine compliment, Nora repeated, as if offering to pay someone for expertise you'd previously dismissed is a compliment rather than a business transaction. They still don't get it. They probably never will, but that's not your responsibility anymore. Tuesday brought news that shifted everything. Captain Hayes called me into his office again, but this time he was smiling. I just got off the phone with the FAA regional office. They're expediting your application for the Advanced Approach Control Program. Apparently, there's been a slot opening at Denver International Airport, and they specifically requested controllers with your profile and experience level. Denver International, one of the busiest airports in the country, handling nearly 70 million passengers annually. The kind of facility where air traffic controllers became legends, where split-second decisions affected not just individual flights, but entire transportation networks. The training program starts in 3 months, and if you complete it successfully, you'd be assigned to Denver Approach Control with a significant pay increase and opportunities for further advancement. I stared at him, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. This was the career advancement I dreamed about but hadn't dared expect so early in my professional development. There is one catch, Captain Hayes continued. The position would require relocation to Denver. You'd be leaving Meridian Regional. Leaving Meridian Regional meant leaving the community I'd built here. It meant leaving Miguel and Nora's mentorship, leaving the colleagues who'd become chosen family, leaving the place where I'd first proven my professional competence. But it also meant taking my expertise somewhere it would be recognized at the highest levels, working with the most challenging airspace in the country, advancing to a level of professional achievement that no one, not my family, not Emma's marketing firm, not anyone who'd ever dismissed my career could minimize or misunderstand. When do you need an answer? Take the week to think about it. This is a big decision. As I walked back to my station, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I had a major decision to make that wouldn't be influenced by my family's opinions or expectations. They'd made it clear that my professional achievements only mattered to them when those achievements could benefit someone else. But Denver International Airport Control Tower wanted my expertise for what it actually was: exceptional skill in managing complex aircraft movements under high-pressure conditions. They weren't interested in leveraging my knowledge for networking opportunities or using my connections for their own advancement. They simply recognized that I was very, very good at what I did. And maybe it was time I started making decisions based on that recognition rather than seeking validation from people who would never provide it. 3 months later, Denver International Airport Control Tower. The view from the control tower at Denver International Airport was like looking over an entire city dedicated to flight. 24 gates at Concourse A alone, with aircraft arriving and departing in a choreographed dance that made Meridian Regional's traffic patterns look like a quiet suburban intersection. From my position in approach control, I could see the runway configuration that made DEN one of the most complex airports in the world. 12 runways arranged in 3 parallel sets, capable of handling over 1,800 aircraft movements daily.
I'd been here for exactly a week, and every day brought challenges that pushed my skills to levels I didn't know I possessed. This morning alone, I'd coordinated simultaneous approaches for 17 aircraft during a weather delay, managed a medical emergency that required priority landing clearance through restricted military airspace, and guided a cargo plane with hydraulic failure through a precision approach that even the veteran controllers were nodding in approval. Outstanding work on that Delta approach, said Controller Martinez, who'd been working Denver approach for 12 years and had a reputation for not giving praise lightly. Textbook coordination with that weather cell moving through. The recognition felt different here. Not surprised acknowledgement that I was more competent than expected, but professional respect between equals who understood exactly what the job required. My phone buzzed during my break, a text from Nora. Miguel flew through Denver yesterday and said the controllers there are already talking about the new hire from Meridian. Says you're making quite an impression.
I smiled, typing back. Learning something new every day. Missing those coffee cart conversations, though. Her response came quickly. Don't get too comfortable out there. Word is that Air Force 2 is planning a stop at Denver next month. Might be right up your alley. Air Force 2. The same aircraft that had requested emergency landing at Meridian Regional just 6 months ago, when I was still trying to convince my family that my work mattered. Now I was positioned to handle the most complex VIP movements in the country, in airspace that challenged even the most experienced controllers. That evening, I was reviewing approach procedures in my Denver apartment when my phone rang with a call I hadn't expected. Mom's number appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. We'd exchanged exactly 3 messages since I'd walked out of their house. Brief, polite communications about my job change and relocation that felt more like updates to distant relatives than conversations with family. I answered on the 4th ring. Riley, sweetheart, I hope I'm not calling too late. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when she was working up to something difficult, like when she'd had to tell me that my childhood dog had died while I was away at college. It's fine, Mom. How are you? Well, that's actually why I'm calling. I saw the news about that government plane, Air Force 2, landing at Denver Airport yesterday. There was a story about how air traffic controllers there manage some kind of complex emergency approach during bad weather. Yesterday's Air Force 2 movement had indeed been challenging. The Vice President's aircraft had encountered severe turbulence and needed immediate priority routing through a thunderstorm system that was affecting most of the western airspace. My sector had coordinated with military controllers, weather services, and 4 different approach facilities to create a safe corridor through conditions that had already diverted dozens of commercial flights. The local news had covered it as a human interest story about the invisible professionals who keep VIP flights safe, though they hadn't mentioned any controllers by name. I was just wondering, Mom continued, her voice gaining that careful cadence she used when requesting favors. If you had any involvement in that situation? Any involvement. As if my role in safely landing the Vice President's aircraft during a weather emergency was something I might have casually observed rather than actively managed. I was the approach controller who coordinated their landing sequence, I said simply. The pause that followed lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. You personally guided Air Force 2 through that storm? Along with several other controllers, yes, it was a team effort involving multiple facilities. Riley! Her voice changed, taking on a tone I'd never heard before, something between awe and what might have been pride. You understand what this means? You guided the Vice President's plane to safety during an emergency. I understood exactly what it meant. It meant I'd done my job at the highest possible level, managing one of the most important aircraft in American aviation during challenging conditions. It meant months of advanced training and years of experience had prepared me for exactly this kind of situation. It meant I belonged in this tower, managing this airspace, making these decisions. But Mom seemed to be processing it differently. Your father and I had no idea you were working at that level of responsibility. When we heard about your job change, we thought it was just a transfer to a different airport. Just a transfer to a different airport, rather than recognition as one of 12 controllers nationwide selected for the most advanced training program in air traffic management. Emma has been asking about you, Mom continued, and there it was, the real reason for the call. She wanted me to tell you how sorry she is about the misunderstanding at dinner. She never meant to offend you.
The misunderstanding, as if the issue had been poor communication rather than years of dismissive treatment culminating in an attempt to exploit my expertise for someone else's benefit. She's been following your career developments, and she's really impressed by your professional advancement. Her marketing firm actually landed that aviation account they were pursuing, and she wanted to thank you for the insights you provided. The insights I provided. I had provided no insights to Emma. I had explicitly declined her consultation request and walked out of their house. The thing is, Mom's voice grew more hesitant, she's been promoted to lead the aviation marketing division, and they're expanding into government contract work. They're looking for consultants with experience in VIP aircraft coordination and high-level security protocols. VIP aircraft coordination, high-level security protocols. The same expertise they dismissed as too technical was now worth pursuing for government contract work. I know you were hesitant before, Mom continued, but this would be different, much more prestigious, much more lucrative. Emma mentioned that consultants for government aviation work can earn more in a single project than most people make in a year. Much more prestigious, much more lucrative, as if the prestige and financial value of my expertise had suddenly increased because Emma's business needs had elevated. She asked me to reach out because she didn't want any family tension to interfere with what could be a really beneficial professional relationship.
Family tension. That's what she called years of treating my career achievements as unworthy of recognition or respect. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window of my apartment, looking out at the distant lights of Denver International Airport. Right now, aircraft were moving through my colleagues' sectors, flights carrying families to reunions, business travelers to critical meetings, medical patients to specialized treatment facilities. Each movement required precision, expertise, and split-second decision-making that kept hundreds of people safe every hour. Riley, are you still there? I'm here, Mom. So what do you think? Would you be willing to consider Emma's new offer? She's really matured in her understanding of the aviation industry, and she has tremendous respect for your expertise now. Tremendous respect for my expertise now. Now that my expertise could help her secure government contracts worth millions of dollars. Mom, I said, my voice carrying the same calm authority I used when issuing critical instructions to pilots, I need you to understand something clearly. Of course, sweetheart. My expertise in VIP aircraft coordination isn't something I developed for Emma's benefit. It's something I've been building throughout my entire career. When I tried to explain emergency procedures to you over family dinners, that was me sharing the foundation of knowledge that now qualifies me to handle Air Force Two movements. Silence. When I described managing multiple aircraft during severe weather, that was me explaining the skills that led to my selection for this position. When I told you about navigation system failures and precision approaches, that was me sharing the experience that makes me competent to coordinate government VIP flights. More silence. The knowledge Emma wants to access for her government contracts is the same knowledge you all dismissed as too technical for family conversation. The expertise she's willing to pay consultant fees for is the same expertise you treated as a hobby that computers could probably handle just as well. Riley, I'm not finished, Mom. The authority in my voice was absolute. I coordinate aircraft movements that affect thousands of people every day. I make decisions that determine whether families get home safely, whether medical emergencies reach hospitals in time, whether critical cargo reaches its destination. Last week, I ensured that the Vice President of the United States landed safely during a weather emergency that could have international implications. I paused, letting that sink in. And the only reason my family is interested in my career now is because someone you want to impress thinks my expertise might be profitable for her business. The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up. That's not true, Riley. We've always been proud of you. No, Mom, you've always been polite to me. There's a difference. I walked back to my desk, looking at the approach control manuals and weather charts that covered my workspace, the tools of a profession that my family had finally noticed, but only because it had become useful to someone else.
Emma is welcome to pursue government aviation consulting through the proper channels. There are dozens of qualified consultants who specialize in that type of work. I'm not one of them, not because I lack the expertise, but because I've chosen to use that expertise here, in this tower, keeping aircraft safe rather than helping marketing firms profit from government contracts. But Riley, I need to go, Mom. I have approach control procedures to review for tomorrow's shift. Take care. I ended the call and turned my phone to silent, then sat back down at my desk surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd accomplished without my family support or recognition. Advanced certification documents, commendation letters, training manuals that represented years of dedicated professional development. Outside my window, Denver International continued its 24-hour operation, aircraft lights moving across the darkness in patterns that most people would see as random, but that I understood as carefully orchestrated perfection. Tomorrow, I'd return to that control tower and take responsibility for guiding those aircraft safely through some of the most complex airspace in the world. Not because my family finally understood the importance of what I do, not because someone they respect thinks my expertise is valuable, but because I'd found my calling in keeping people safe, and I'd earned my place among the professionals trusted with that responsibility. My phone buzzed with a text from Captain Hayes. Heard through the grapevine that you handled Air Force 2 beautifully yesterday, making us all proud out there. Making us all proud. From the people who trained me, supported me, and recognized my potential before anyone else thought to look. I typed back, "Just doing what you taught me to do." His response came immediately. "No, Riley, you're doing what you were always capable of. We just gave you the tools." I set my phone aside and returned to my procedure review, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered to people who understood its value. Some victories aren't about proving doubters wrong. They're about finding the place where your skills are recognized, your expertise is valued, and your contribution makes a difference in the world. Sometimes the most important audience is the one that was paying attention all along. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between seeking approval from people who don't value you and building a career with people who do? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.